Shalom. Good morning. Welcome once again to our Friday Bible study as we continue in the book of Zechariah, chapter 5 of 14. As customary, Bob Mendelson, head of Jews for Jesus Australasia, will be teaching us as we glean wonderful truths from this chapter. Hear what God has to say to Zechariah and to the children of Israel and those around about. So please engage, and we'll be back in our Q&A.
Thank you, Jimmy, and shalom and welcome everyone to our class today. We are continuing in this prophetic book written by a young Jewish man living in Jerusalem about 500 BCE or so, as he writes to his people, those living there in Judah and also those living in Babylon. To each of those groups, he has some clear words, and I trust that those words he spoke 2,500 years ago will speak to you and to me, as we will consider what God meant as he used that young man. And we will try to learn what God has to say to us as 21st century people. If you don't mind, please read the chapter before you come to the class live. And if you're watching on YouTube, those of you watching later after this today, for one reason or another, certainly welcome to you. But if you haven't read the chapter, please pause your playback. Read chapter 5 of the prophet Zechariah, and then rejoin us. Thanks. Welcome back. Once again, we're met in today's chapter by two night visions of our prophet Zechariah. Vision 6 and 7 out of the 8 that he's going to use at the beginning of his teaching. These are explanations about God's plan for the Jewish people back in Babylon and here in his new home country of Judah, which part of modern-day Israel. The last couple of visions had to do with individuals, namely Joshua the high priest and Zerubbabel the governor, religion and governance. All the while, the temple is being rebuilt there in Jerusalem, and most of the Jewish people, however, remain in Babylon. God has many things to say to our people, and he uses different prophets to help us understand. Zechariah is given dreams, or visions, these are called, to interpret or to talk about and thus make understanding clear for us. Chapter 5 relates two such visions. The first, which is verses 1 through 4, is about a flying scroll. Think a Megillah, a scroll. That's the Hebrew word, like the Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther, or the scroll of Lamentations, or like the Apostle Paul would have carried with him, or the one of Isaiah that Yeshua took in Capernaum there at the synagogue, and from which he read to highlight his own person being Messiah, the anointed one of the Almighty. Only here in Zechariah, the scroll is massive. It's 5 meters it's 5 meters wide, 10 meters long. That is huge. According to Rashi, those are the same dimensions as the doorway to the sanctuary. We know from 1 Kings chapter 6 that these are the dimensions of the portico of Solomon's temple. It's unmissable. And beyond that, it's flying. That makes it doubly noticeable. Now remember, this is a vision, so you have to wonder how Zechariah knew the dimensions. Did little hash marks show up every 1 meter segment to help him know, oh, that's 1, 2, 3. We don't know, but somehow he knew the actual dimensions. I'm reminded of Paul seeing a vision of a man who was Macedonian. This is in Acts chapter 16. The man from Macedonia invited Paul and his cohort to visit when Paul was still living over in Turkey. How did Paul know the man was Macedonian? Was it his clothing? Was it his accent, his t-shirt? We just don't know. But Paul knew. So it is here. Zechariah knew the dimensions. I like this vision number 6 because the angel who speaks with him does not indict him for not knowing anything. This is great. In fact, the angel quickly explains the meaning of this flying scroll vision. Oh, and if you wonder who this angel is, you have to revisit chapter 4, just an angel, one with the word of God in his mouth. Also, that angel continues to speak later on in our chapter 5, verse 5, same one. Some commentators think that all these 8 visions happened in the same night. That well could be. Do you remember the title that angel gave God back in chapter 4, the last verse of chapter 4? It called him Adon Kol Haaretz, Lord of all the earth. We mentioned, and we'll come back to that title today and again down the road, as being a title of God, not only the Lord of Israel, the God of Israel, the Lord of hosts of angels, Adonai Tzvaot, but God who wants all people, Jews, non-Jews, to know him and to be his. There are some preventions to that relationship, and in our chapter today, we see a few of them. The angel here in chapter 5, verse 3, says the Megillah is the curse that covers the earth. It is in fact yatzah, it's going forth. That word is used in both visions today about 3 things and is evidence of what is on display. What's the main thing? It's not an incidental to a bigger picture, but rather this thing that's going forth is the bigger picture. And where's the Megillah going? Over the face of the whole earth, the realm, the kingdom of the king, of the realm of the Lord of all the earth. If he is Lord, then he will rule, he will have and sustain justice. Today we need this, maybe more than ever. The curse that we see here in verse number 3 is not the usual word for curse. It is Allah. And don't read into that an Arabic name for God. This is Allah, which has more to do with a courtroom declaration. It's an oath that is sworn, perhaps even the legal document that basically says, you're out of bounds. I hear the phrase, when I read this, time's up. Time's up for you. And the curse flies over the Babylonians. And for what is this curse flying and applied? 2, perhaps more, of the 10 commandments are listed. You can see that right here in our verse, the same verse. Everyone who steals will be purged away according to the writing of one side, and everyone who swears will be purged away according to the writing on the other side. That's not cussing, it's not saying 4-letter words that are bad. Swearing and stealing. Each of these sins is listed on the one side of the Megillah and the other. Stealing is obviously the breaking of commandment number 8, thou shalt not steal. And it's pretty straightforward. That's the central commandment. Remember, there were Shnei Luchot, 2 tablets, and the one tablet which was for our relationship to God, and the other tablet for our relationship with each other. Number 8, right in the middle of the second tablet, the central commandment of the second of the 2 tablets. Swearing is another one, but let's stay with stealing. So don't steal, that's pretty straightforward. Don't steal the fame of another. Don't steal the goods of another. Don't steal anything that belongs to your neighbor. It really could be stretched to say don't steal the wife, so command 7. Don't steal the donkey, so commandment number 10. I mean, it could be all of the second table or second tablet could be summarized in thou shalt not steal. It could be that it's because it's central to the second, that it is the culmination of or the fullness of that second tablet. Swearing could be falsely testifying, which could lead someone to be judged guilty of a capital offense. So if I swear and say, yes, I saw Menachem doing that, then I could get Menachem to be judged incorrectly. I could give false evidence. False testimony is swearing in this case. It could be taking God's name in vanity. I swear on this Bible, on which my hand is set, that Menachem did that. So it could be a breaking of the third commandment about taking God's name in vain. It could be any number of things, but it's certainly taking an oath. When someone is judged to be guilty of a capital offense, they could be killed. It had to be by two witnesses. The two who testified had to be the ones who pushed them off that hill, the mound into which they'd fall into a bed of rocks. Or they had to pull the cable, the wire, the rope, whatever they used, to one on either side of the neck so that they were hanged in that way. The two witnesses were also the executioners. Swearing could be taking God's name in vanity, again, a breaking of the central commandment of the first tablet. The sins or crimes are significant, no matter on which tablet they're listed, and no matter how unaware the Babylonians might defend themselves. We didn't know. Stealing and swearing are against human governments and against an internal clock of morality. And just to ensure that nobody says, I didn't know, the Megillah is flying. It's available to all people to see and to learn. Remember, Paul said this in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 and following, and I'll quote, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they're without excuse." End quote. The scroll is written on both sides, stealing on one side, swearing on the other. I flash back on Exodus 32, where the tablets were written on one side and the other, and the rabbis teach that the writing was the same on each side, which would be weird, wouldn't it be? But I mean, think of a capital letter A or capital letter O. You could read that from either side. I'm not sure how they did the letter P or the Gimel or the Aleph. I'm not sure how one day we'll see it, and that'll be pretty exciting. But my mind cannot quite understand the two sides being the same. And that's why when it was lifted up, everyone could see it no matter where they were. The result of the Megillah flying is that judgment will come on everyone who breaks these commands. The Hebrew is nikah. It's it's a courtroom word, and it's almost ironic, as the word nikah means to be declared or to be unpunished. I agree with Michael Stead, who says this curse is being applied because the courts have left sinners unpunished, thus allowing injustice in their realm. It says in my version, will be purged away. It's that word nikah. Well, listen to these words in verse 4. "I will make it go forth, and it will enter the house of the thief and the house of the one who swears." So it's an individual. It's really particularized. It's not that there's one thief in Babylon or one person who swears falsely. It's saying every person. When it says the thief, it really particularizes it, and I take that on board. And it's going to enter the house of the thief in the house. This sounds exactly like Egypt and the Exodus, when the angel of death came into each house, when all the plagues actually affected the house of any individual Egyptian. Judgment was delayed in Egypt's case for hundreds of years, but God had enough. So it is with Babylon. It's up to here. I've had it with you people. This announcement makes clear that God is a moral and ethical God who wants all people to comply with his standards of conduct. Warren Wiersbe comments on this section. He says this, quote, "Lawlessness abounds today, and the only commandment many people worry about is, 'Thou shalt not get caught.' Ethics is something studied in the classroom, but not seriously practiced in the marketplace. And the Ten Commandments are only dusty artifacts in the Museum of Morality. No wonder Hosea wrote, 'They make many promises, take false oaths, and make agreements. Therefore lawsuits spring up like poisonous weeds in a plowed field.'" People break God's law and then try to use man's law to protect themselves, and often they win. That's all from Warren Wiersbe. Barry Webb says in his commentary that the end result of this flying scroll is the eradication of that people who swear and who steal. Oh, one last comment on this scroll. It enters the houses of sinners and consumes, look at that, verse 4, with its timber and stones. I don't think that's a reference to construction elements. I think it's about the idols of the people, made of wood and stone. God, the jealous God, is ever desirous of his people and all people to know him personally. Even you on this Zoom call and those of you watching on YouTube, God wants to know you personally and for you to know him in a real way. Vision number 7, the next one of 8, remember, is about an ephah and a woman named Wickedness. Now, don't get too fussed about the gender of wickedness. In fact, most of the characteristics by which we define people, wisdom, folly, beauty, honor, etc., they're all female nouns. So using a female word for wickedness is not indicative of any gender specificity. In verse 5, the angel again asks Zechariah to lift up his eyes and to see. And this time, Zechariah asks the angel to explain, what is this I'm seeing? And this time the angel is gentler and kinder and not degrading him. The angel says that the item that's yatzah, that's going forth, is an ephah. Now that's a measuring item. Think of a large vessel like a bushel basket, like a bushel basket, but not big enough for a full-grown woman. And there's a lead cover over the basket, over this ephah, with a woman inside. This is weird, isn't it? The woman is cast or thrown, shalach, really tossed into the ephah, and flown by two women with wings to Shinar. That's the ancient name for Babylonia. And the woman is set on a pedestal there. That's the vision. What does it mean? Well, it's clearly symbolic on many levels. The basket is a measuring item, as was the flying scroll measured earlier. And we use the term meted or measured out to verbalize our interest in making things right. For instance, we might say, the judge measures out justice, or the courts meted a verdict of guilty. Okay. Here the ephah, which measures about 5 liters, is symbolic of that justice, especially since the thieves and those who swear falsely were previously symbols of injustice. Verse 7, the lead cover. Using lead rather than gold or silver, again, a picture, I'm going to say, of falsehood, especially with regard to weights and measures. I don't know if you've overheard people or even been tempted yourself at the self-checkout at Woolies or Kohl's. When people weigh their own produce and choose, because you have to choose, is that a banana or is that a capsicum? You choose a substitute vegetable, maybe one that doesn't cost as much for an expensive one. They weigh the same, but the actual item they take is not the one for which they're paying. And that's hard for the grocery store to monitor. Maybe impossible. Well, that's in view here. Lead is much cheaper than gold. In fact, this entire vision sounds to me to represent commercialism, that is, out of order consumerism and false measures. And what causes that to take place? Here in Babylon, what causes it to take place at the coals? The Apostle James, half-brother of our Messiah, said this, quote, "What is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? You lust, and you don't have, so you commit murder. You're envious, and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You don't have because you don't ask. And then you do ask, but you don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. You adulteresses, don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God." End quote. The word to describe those lust but do not have people is right here, wickedness, or as James said, the enemy of God. Back to the ephah. Remember, a true balance in weights and measures is crucial in a just society. Otherwise, there's stealing going on. This from Torah, quote, "You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measurement of weight or capacity. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt. You shall thus observe all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them. I am the Lord." That's almost signed God. Let me give you a few other verses on this justice and ephah. Deuteronomy 25, Amos chapter 8, Micah chapter 6. You're hearing a song in Micah 6, aren't you? And Proverbs 20. There's lots more. Stead also makes a play on words, notice, to the word for lead cover, kikar oferet, which is likely a variation of hakaporet. Kaporet, you might remember, that is it's nicknamed the mercy seat in Leviticus 16, but it's the atonement cover in the tabernacle. In the same way, the Holy Ark in the tabernacle had a kaporet, a cover. Mercy, I love mercy seat, but it doesn't translate so properly. So the wickedness ephah had a cover. In the same way, the Holy Ark had a cover, and this, which is about 1/5 the size of the Ark, had a cover. Stead uses the term anti-ark as he showcases the problem of idolatry which characterized the Shinar Republic. The stone of lead was cast, again, shalach, cast or thrown onto the ephah. It felt violent each time I read this. God's wrath is not gentle, it's powerful. He's the Lord of angelic hosts. And the lead weight is cast onto the mouth, it says, onto the opening, but it's the mouth. A shut my mouth moment. There is no more self-defense in the courtroom of heaven. In verse 9, there are two women with wind in their wings like a stork. The women lifted the basket into the sky. Mind you, storks, which are good at carrying large items, are still not kosher for Jewish people. We can't eat them. So these are unclean birds. And these task-oriented storks are not carrying a baby to the mommy, but rather taking this woman of wickedness to the place of sin, Babylon, and there the ephah and certainly the woman of note will be set on a pedestal. What is her crime or sin? The lead cover is a hint and the ephah is a hint, and I believe it's the sin of covetousness which leads to false weights and measures. You might remember the 7 deadly sins. Remember them? They're pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, And sloth. Okay, sloth. Greed is the basis of this covetousness, and that's at the heart of the wrong measures, the thievery, and the false swearing. Vision 6 and 7 again form a dual witness, an accusation against the nations of the world. Remember, kol haaretz, when two witnesses are called to the courtroom. Those two witnesses, the flying scroll and the ephah, highlight the sins of the nations. In Vision 6, eradication is in view. In Vision 7, removal is in view. Whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, similar judgment awaits those who refuse to listen to what God is saying through his prophets. God will measure according to his standards, and if we're found wanting, judgment will be measured out to us. Now, without understanding God's justice system, we might think to ourselves, okay, yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm not as bad as that guy. Paul wrote the believers in Corinth, and he said this: we are not bold to class or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they're without understanding. Yes, you can always find someone who's less holy than you. You can always find people who practice at least some of the 7 deadly sins more boldly, and in comparison to them, you're probably doing very well. But Paul says those who do that are without understanding. Then there are others on this call who try hard to measure up to God's standards of love and kindness or justice and righteousness. Good on you for that. But even you will fall short. So where is their hope? Paul wrote this: God made him who knew no sin to become sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. There it is. The justice of God is satisfied in relationship with Yeshua. If we trust Yeshua for our life to repair us, to override the sins we committed, and sad to say, will yet commit again, then righteousness, that is, right standing with God, will be ours. Hallelujah. So what are our options? The pedestal on which wickedness was going to stay there at the last verse in chapter 5. The pedestal of exposure with wickedness as our being for all to see, or the forgiveness and the relationship with God that he wants for all people. He wants to be Lord of all the earth, even your earth. Will you say yes to him today?